I hope everyone is enjoying a safe and happy holiday. And here at Chucking Darts, we're going back in to the ACC. Welcome to Chucking Darts, a podcast of informed, rigorous, reckless, harmless, speculative, and fun predictions about the game we love. And you can call me Chuck. This is episode number 218. Episode number 217 was released the week before Christmas. For those who celebrate, that was a deep scouting look at Cooper Flagg as well as uh, Kon Knueppel and Khaman Maluach, his teammates at Duke. It was really the first scouting episode for me of the 2024-2025 draft cycle. I had on Brian Geisinger, ACC extraordinaire, who has an excellent Substack and does a lot of work for 24/7 as well, independently. We had intended on that being like a far-reaching episode into the ACC to go like as deep as we possibly could, but which is pretty on brand for this podcast. We took the first topic, stretched that out to 90 some odd minutes, and that was about it. So he is back to look back into a conference that is, maligned nationally, but they always end up in the Elite Eight and the Final Four in March. Uh, for draft purposes, I'm excited to get back into the ACC because there are players at big wing and guard that all have arguments, but there's no first round lock after the Duke players. But in a year like this, which I think is a little more cloudy than maybe it's being portrayed, there's lots of opportunities to rise up, and I'm excited to dig through some gems. But before we get to that, Mr. Geisinger is back. Brian, how are you and how was your holiday?
I'm doing well. Holidays were good. Saw family, saw friends, had people come back into North Carolina that it was, first time seeing in a year or so. So that was always nice. Still watched a lot of b-ball. It's been nice to sort of like use the little lull of the college basketball season to catch up on some backlog of film and stuff. But had a good holiday. Happy to be back on holidays, and yeah, hope everyone out there had a safe travels and had good times with friends and family as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Everyone on my end is safe and happy. What let's get to your Substack immediately. I know we popped it in the first episode as well, but what is your most recent post there? Where can people find it?
Yeah, Brian Geisinger, my full name, substack.com. The title of my Substack is Split the Action. I just wanted to give it a little bit of a moniker there. But yeah, Brian Geisinger at substack.com. It's a lot of X and O film analysis, numbers, mostly covering the ACC, but there's going to be some Hornet stuff up there and some non-ACC stuff. And I think closer to draft time, there will be some more sort of like scouting profiles of guys as well, where I can kind of get into some written thoughts on certain players. The most recent post was after the Duke Georgia Tech game the other week, where I looked at some of the sets that Duke ran down in Atlanta that worked for one of their better offensive games of the season. I also looked at Duke putting Kon Knueppel as the ball handler in pick and roll action with Khaman Maluach, which is something we talked about a
Hmm.
little bit on the last episode, like maybe seeing Kon as a lead ball handler. Duke went to that quite a bit on the road at Tech, and then also looked at sort of their use of Cooper Flagg as a guy. Duke opens a lot of games running Cooper off of back screens trying to get lobs. So I sort of looked at some of the play types that they've gone through with that. And then talked a little bit. This is not a 2025 guy, but we'll be chucking darts on maybe Isaiah Evans in 2026 or
Hmm.
2027. But like a real big time microwave shooter and scorer for coming off the former top 25 prospect blue chip guy who's like really carved a role like has done a nice job the last month or so, really since the Auburn game, carving out a role for him on that roster. I mean, it seemed like Duke kind of had their top eight that they were going to go to battle with, in tight games, and the guys off the bench were all the veterans: Sion James, Mason Gillis, and Malik Brown. Sion James now in the starting lineup. Caleb Foster pushed to the bench as he continues to struggle. But Isaiah Evans shooting 50% on threes and taking like I think over 22 3-point attempts for 100 possessions. So He's in the Damari Monsanto, Traquavion Smith, just no conscious chuckers. But like really like serious like movement shooter, coming off screens, and it's been cool to see them use him in partnership with Knueppel because they get those two guys flying off of screens on the same plays. And I don't know, like he's a guy that in theory could help also open up the floor for Cooper Flagg, throughout the season too. So deep dive on that sort of stuff. I've got another one planned, hopefully for early next week. I want to look at some of the stuff UNC's doing this season with Ian Jackson. And maybe we'll get into a little bit more throughout the pod, and also looking at Clemson's half-court offense and secondary break, and sort of how Ian Schieffelin is being used as their sort of like do everything, front court players being used to sort of unlock things as a shooter and the playmaker. And I kind of want to do I'm hoping to do check-ins, sort of like larger check-ins on Wake Forest, and a team that's actually been quite good in Pittsburgh, because I really like the mix that Jeff Capel has with the Panthers right now. So Substack, briangeisinger.substack.com. Thanks for letting me get the plug in there.
Of course, it's great. We're gonna get to hopefully a lot of those teams because a lot of them, like I said, have interesting guys that have theories behind them. Where I want to start, however, is in the traditional Atlantic Coast powerhouse, Stanford University, and go to Maxime Raynaud, correct? That's how it's Raynaud or Raynaud?
I've heard it pronounced both ways. So
We'll go with Raynaud because I believe he is French. And so I'll default to what I hope is the appropriate pronunciation. Maxime Raynaud, for those who don't know him, he is listed at 7'1" and is Stanford's leading scorer, and by far, like the true legitimate stretch center option in the conference, and one of probably the premier stretch center options in the country. Currently mocked, I think first round is sort of like certainly not out of the question. If you want to find a mock with Maxime Raynaud in the first round, you can certainly find it. He's averaging about 21 and 12. Splits are, let's see, 55% from two, 38% from three on over 7 threes per 100. That he basically has more than doubled his 3-point volume this year and is really getting them up. He has a teammate in Jaylen Blakes, who I also find interesting. And so Stanford has a little bit of juice there and potential for a two-man game. But right now, the offense really does revolve around Raynaud. And so given his really unique, or I guess coveted, better word than unique, given his coveted skill set for someone his height, it's no surprise that the NBA is taking real notice of him having this big jump. He turns 22 in the spring. So he's sort of traditionally senior age, even though I believe he might have another year of eligibility. But talk to me about what you have seen with Raynaud, and sort of as his stock has risen here, how high you think it should potentially go.
Yeah, I think he might be, even though he's a senior, he might be younger than Bay Dongo at Georgia Tech, who's another guy that is on NBA radars. Even though Dongo's only a sophomore at Tech. And I would say Raynaud's probably a top 5 or 6 center, would be my guess in this class. And yeah, if you're in that range, like there might be a case for you to be a first round guy, but I think it's an obvious sell. 7'1", good size, smooth mover, and skilled, right? I mean, the shooting touch, the passing touch. I don't think of him as like just an unbelievable like pick you apart passing hub, even like a Kyle Filipowski last season. But sort of more in the like Quentin Post role for that, like that he occupied for Boston College this season. And yeah, in the ACC, maybe Guillermo Diaz-Graham at Pitt is like maybe one other. He's struggled shooting this season, and honestly, Pitt's playing him more at the 4. But is the one other sort of like 7-footer that can move around and play in the short roll and stretch the floor a little bit. But Raynaud's much more ready for the NBA. He's bigger, he's stronger, and the pick and roll chemistry he has with Blakes is pretty solid for two guys who are like sort of just getting the wheels spinning on playing together. You can see the advantage of having a 7-1 guy who can shoot like that, what he does. Just
Mhm.
immediately what he's going to do to bust up different pick and roll coverages. Like if you're playing any ball screen coverage where the screen defender is below the level, um, he's open, right? And all of a sudden you can throw to him on the pop. He can shoot. He's got a quick release, but if there is a stunt or a closeout or whatever, he can put the ball on the floor. He can get into handoff actions, comfortable passer. And then the skills are certainly on display too when he's in the post too. Like got moves, can finish with both hands, has good touch. Offensively, there's like a lot to like here. He can just help you open up the floor. He gets the ball moving side to side. He can play finish from different levels. He gets on the offensive rebounding numbers are off the charts this season. They've been very good. Um, so yeah, I've just really been impressed with the offensive game and his development. Like he's a guy I remember watching his freshman season when scouting Harrison Ingram, when Harrison was a
Mhm.
same recruiting class to Stanford. And his defensive role is interesting this season. Like Kyle Smith is, first year at Stanford coming from Washington State, and it's putting Raynaud into some different looks. Like occasionally they're in a matchup zone, and he's in the back anchoring that, and just at times it's sort of like it can be even tricky to figure out what defense they're in, what coverages they're running, and as the biggest guy on the floor, that can kind of put him in like weird spots where guys are just driving downhill right at him. And I don't think there's a lot of fear in him as a rim protector, even though he's blocking. I think he's 3.5% block rate. Not terrible, but I don't think he's like a massive rim deterrence. I do think his ability to guard in the post and like use his strength and his size and his length to wall up, I think he can actually be like a little bit of a deterrent in those situations. But when sort of like the fast or hyper athlete guys are able to like catch, go, get downhill, he's not going to offer like amazing resistance at the rim, but I don't think he's like a total negative on that side of the court. Like I think there's some stuff he does pretty well defensively. There's some versatility there. The rebounding's been good, so he's had a terrific season. And like I mean, I think if the season ended now, he would be a first team All ACC type guy and would have a case for like player of the year type stuff. We'll see what happens when the competition picks up. Stanford really hasn't played anybody yet, but
Yeah.
I think he's going to put up.
Well,
I think he's going to put up big number. I think the shots for him are going to be there. And when the defense rotates and sends numbers to him, he can make a difference as a passer too. So I think he's in line for a huge season.
he certainly is. I mean, the interest to me with him is that he's a dribble pass shoot kind of 7-footer. And in the NBA, that's going to be weaponized to a greater extent, even than Kyle Davis is doing, just because the surrounding talent is going to help bring his talent out. Because it's great that he has a quick trigger and that the shots going in, at a career best clip right now. But it's watching him really attack closeouts and watching the five or whoever's rotating out to him sort of fly by or be
Mhm.
sloppy and seeing that he can not, like you said, not any crazy kind of passes, but if there is someone in the lane hanging back to
Mhm.
dump the ball off to, he will hit that pass if the defense commits to him. And there's always something about a 7-footer heading downhill off the dribble that's going to attract defensive attention. It's
Yeah,
that
yeah.
way in the NBA, and it certainly is that way in college, no matter what conference you're in. So you can see how there's a relatively smooth fit for him at the next level offensively. Um, Defensively is where I'm going to be paying more attention to him for the remainder of the season because, like Filipowski, actually, you mentioned that you thought Raynaud, just in terms of his movement and sort of being strong through his chest, might be able to provide a little bit of deterrence. That was more the kind of deterrence that Filipowski,
Mhm.
to the extent that he offered rim deterrence, that was how he did it. And he had a block rate that I think was better than Raynaud's last year, probably around
Mhm.
like 5.5 or 5, right around there.
Yeah.
But whenever he went up against a really good post big, Filipowski got punished. He ultimately goes like in the early 30s in the draft. He had off the court controversy that probably dropped him, 10 spots or so. But
Yeah.
Filipowski was also coming from a much more, I guess, a much more privileged recruiting position than Raynaud was. So I to me, when I've seen him, I like they just played Oregon and got completely outclassed. Oregon was by far the best team they played on their schedule. And Raynaud was hot early in that game, but I forget the name of their senior center, their like old giant center, but had a hard time containing him. And Oregon's full of a lot of veteran guys. They play very physically, coached very well by Dana Altman. And defensively, Raynaud just didn't have much of an answer after the first like 5 minutes of that game. And I wonder when I look at the league now and uh how like precious those center spots are. The argument sort of cuts two ways. One, you can say that his offensive versatility is going to make him a complement to lots of different kinds of offensive lineups. And so maybe he has a better chance of securing the spot than a rim running center, which are thought to be so fungible in the NBA, which I don't really agree with. But there are more guys who don't shoot at 7 feet than guys who do. And
Yeah.
Raynaud has that in his favor. I don't think the defense is to the level where I can see him starting at center in the NBA. So I'm sort of like, that to me is sort of super rosy and ambitious to think that this guy can start at center in the league, at least for any like real stretch of time for a good team.
Yeah, he's not. He can't anchor a defense.
Right.
He's not. Doesn't mean he can't make a roster, but yeah, he's not a full time starting center in the NBA.
But the question really to me is similar to Filipowski last year. Does he have enough size and like how will he measure out at the combine to where teams might be able to try to play him next to a center as part of a bench unit or something like that? Or is he only going to be viable as the 5 and as a backup 5? Because if that's sort of where he's going, where he has to be a backup center in the NBA, then I think it can still work and he'll get his chances because offenses are always going to be looking for that little extra bit of leverage. But uh, I kind of think that you need to be a little more dynamic defensively, even for a backup, than what he is. And that's why you see Filipowski, like that's a crowded front court in Utah, but you see them play him at the 4 and try things out with him. I mean, you saw with with how teams are looking to maximize size on the floor and skill. Karl Anthony Towns played next to Rudy Gobert,
Mhm.
as sort of the ultimate version of this on a conference finalist last year. And now, Cat's back at the 5. He's a different level of talent than Raynaud, but you see how a team could look at this kid Raynaud and say, I think we could get big in a lineup with him at the 4. Do
Mhm.
you think that he is dynamic enough offensively to get minutes at the 4 at the next level?
Uh, you know what? Yes, I think but like I think you would need to be really thoughtful with how you're deploying things. Because yeah, I think he can like spot up. I think you can spot up, and I think there's enough sort of like act. You can just think about stuff that like Minnesota would run with Gobert and Towns as double screeners, and one of them's popping and one's rolling, and you're able to leverage the shooting and the passing of one of the guys to sort of like unlock the rim pressure component and what that does to stress defenses. So like potentially, but defensively, you'd have to really think about how you're managing it. Are you playing zone? Yeah, I don't think I don't think Raynaud is a guy that if you're playing four in the NBA, you're also going out and like switching.
Yeah.
Most fours you've got to be able to switch around and guard, and like I mean that's not happening. And the other thing too with a guy like Filipowski, and like this would there were probably I went to basically every game at Duke that Flip played. I covered all of those games, and there were so many times after games, especially last season, his sophomore year, where opposing coaches would say he's 7 feet tall, but that's a guard. Like that's how he plays like a guard because he can handle, and obviously he's such a good passer, and he can do stuff in space. And I'm not sure Raynaud is like to me, you're not going to give him the ball and run 4-5 pick and roll with Raynaud. You know what I mean? So like,
Hmm.
I don't see that. And so you're already sort of like lowering that sort of the offensive versatility, role for him. So I'll be honest with you, like I think his pathway is pretty narrow, but if he's shooting like this, like if he shoots 38, if he shoots in the high 30s on volume all season as a 7-1 guy, like he's absolutely gonna like those guys get cracks in the NBA.
Yeah.
I don't think Jay Huff is like a great analog because Huff was such like an above the rim guy too. Like it was an incredible shot blocker in college, like an incredible rim protector and an incredible mover because when he was playing at Virginia, he was often hedging ball screens and having to recover back into the paint. Um, and was such an amazing, lob catcher on empty side ball screens. And I don't see that with Raynaud. So I don't, but there's still this like, well, he's 7 feet, he can handle the ball in space, and he can shoot. So like guys like that, they're gonna get multiple chances. Even a guy like Huff, who's in his like mid to late 20s now. Um,
Huff
and
was Defensive Player of the Year in the ACC, wasn't he?
He
As I
he
recall.
may have been in 2021. I actually wrote an article how I thought he should have been ACC player. It went to Moses Wright from Georgia Tech.
Hmm.
I kind of thought it should have. I thought there was a case for Huff to be player of the year. I can't. If he wasn't Depoy, he was like definitely like an all defense guy in the league. He blocks a ton of shots
Yeah.
every year on a per possession basis. He was a game wrecker.
Yeah,
But
I think he was around 14 block rate. He was, I
yeah,
mean, it was up there. It was
is
wild. That
great. And
was,
then he was an awesome engine of offense too for especially like his fifth season at UVA. He was an incredible, pick and pop guy, screen roll guy. But they also started to really use him as a passer on those pick and pops. They'd have, Trey Murphy cut. What a crazy
yeah,
lineup.
it's Trey Murphy and
Having
Sam Hauser
Sam Hauser
splitting
just
off of Jay Huff, baby.
these
What
these
more
just
can you ask?
these giants who could all shoot the ball. That was a crazy Virginia team. Um, but yeah, that was like one of the ways they would get Trey going downhill was like him cutting off the weak side when Huff would pick and pop into space, and there'd have to be some weak side defensive action to try to like corral Huff on the pop. And I think Raynaud can do those kinds of like that kind of passing is in his wheelhouse. You know what I mean? Like there if the defense is icing or downing the ball screen, and as opposed to like setting the screen, he sort of like slides to the middle or to the slot. Guard throws it over there. You get a weak side stunt, and then either there's a kick or there's a guy cutting to the rim. Like I think he's making those feeds, but not like sort of like live ball. Filipowski was just an incredible short roll passer and a guy that you could also like literally put the ball in his hands and run either an inverted pick and roll or 4 or 5 pick and roll with. And I'm not sure that's the kind. I mean, there was a clip the other day going around of Flip running 4 or 5 pick and roll with Utah, and obviously like that's a creative coaching staff, and it's gonna be fun to see more and more stuff that they try with Filipowski. I'm not sure that's in the cards for Raynaud, but I think the fact that he can execute a few different coverages defensively, guarding ball screens, his comfort, getting some reps playing this kind of like some wonky, matchup style zones. Like there's a couple teams in the league that like to use those tactics. So those are, potentially valuable reps. So I think there's a player here, but I sort of do think his pathway is pretty narrow. I just think that archetype 7-1, you know, a 22-year-old who can shoot threes. Like those guys, he's going to get an extended look.
Yeah, I mean, it is reductive to go back to the shot over and over, but there are versions of this type where the shot is more theoretical. And even though the player might be a bit more athletic and they'll get cups of coffee in the NBA, like they are always living on the edge. I'm talking about like Mo Guay or JT
Mhm.
Thor, the kinds of guys who like the athleticism is extremely enticing. And they might take a handful of threes per 100 possessions. And when it goes in, the confirmation bias kicks in and you go, oh, this guy's going to be a shooter. But in reality, they just don't really have the touch or the form or the productivity to rely on in the NBA, at least for more than, a two-way or something like that.
Mhm.
And Raynaud, I think, is better than that. I think I don't know if I would use this as a really solid player comp, but in terms of a guy who has some size, though is not as big as Raynaud, and has carved out the ability to spell their starting five, do a little bit of sort of maybe not guard stuff the way that you mentioned with Filipowski, but like imitating a big wing on closeouts and
Mhm.
being that sort of passing through it. Maybe someone like Trey Lyles in Sacramento. And like Raynaud is bigger than Lyles. Lyles is probably a bit more athletic in space.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so you can, I guess, survive on defense with him a little bit more. But it's the sort of idea that size and that shooting ability, there's a place for it with how well Raynaud moves just downhill.
Mhm.
That in and of itself is going to draw defensive attention. And so I don't want to overthink it. I think that his actual like usage at the NBA might be pretty small, but nonetheless, NBA player is an NBA player. And if you're helping your offense, then you have a good chance at helping your team win. So
Mhm.
is there anything else you want to hit on with him before we might do a cursory mention of Jaylen Blakes, but anything else you want to mention with him?
No, I feel good about Raynaud. Just did want to put this out there. Huff was all defensive team with the ACC in 2021. He was not the defensive player of the year, but it's a good dart. ACC deploy that season, Jose
Leaky
Alvarado.
Black?
Jose Alvarado.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Grand Theft Alvarado. Next year, Mark Williams in 2022. But that was a good Georgia Tech team. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
Huff all defensive team, but not depoy in the
I
conference. But yeah,
remember
no.
their ACC tournament game against Florida State because it was against Scotty Barnes. I think that was the title
Mhm.
game, and Alvarado kept picking his pocket, and because I think Georgia Tech won that ACC title if I recall correctly.
They did,
Um,
yes, they did. That was how ended up making the tournament
yeah, yeah,
that season.
yep. Um, okay, cool. Well, I will, since there's no other really great time to mention him, I will mention Jaylen Blakes now, who's someone you're familiar with because he's an ACC truther. He's, Raynaud was teammate at Stanford, but he started out at Duke. And he's a senior now. This is his first chance sort of to be a starting point guard and run the controls somewhere. And when we recorded last, we talked about Blake's off of Mike.
Mhm.
And I was at the time more into him before I saw him play Oregon because he was really ineffective against Oregon.
Yeah, yeah.
And his other really bad game this year was against Santa Clara, which is probably the second best team that Stanford has played. So, Blake's at the end of the day is a very athletic, long armed guard, like a power bowling ball of a guard. Think sort of like Talon Horton Tuckery in
Yep.
terms of his build, but like more sort of, I guess, defined than THT is. And someone who can obviously play two ways because he was a defensive guard first, and someone who can really protect the ball with his dribble. That's what I see with him is when he's going downhill. He has a very healthy assist to turnover ratio because he's able to protect the ball so well. And because of that, you couple that with his athleticism and you have a player who is very comfortable getting to certain spots on the floor. To me, the problem is that Blake's, even though he has some pretty good touch indicators, he's high 70s free throw rate. He's been very good around the rim and like decent in mid range so far this year. But Blake's is just ultimate finishing is either too far away because his three-pointer looks very strange and his low 30s at the moment, or he does not sort of display the confidence of scoring at volume when sort of his first driving option is taken away or made a little bit difficult. He might come up with a counter and shoot some fadeaway, but he never really looks very comfortable while doing it. His footwork in the lane is basically just to get downhill, and then everything else is a very sort of basic pivot off of that. And so I don't see sort of the diversity in the shot finishing that I think would really elevate him to someone who should get like a real extended look at draft time. So I feel bad that I'm lower on him, but he is interesting, and that's why I wanted to mention him. What do you think with Blake's?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little hard to believe because Duke had so many guys transfer out after last season, and I mean, he's probably been the best one so far. I
Mhm.
know Roach has done okay at Baylor. Mark Mitchell's been decent at Missouri. TJ Power has really struggled at Virginia. Sean Stewart, okay at Ohio State. Like I'm assuming people listen to this saw Blake's, occasionally the last couple of seasons at Duke. Like, but if you weren't aware, like he really was like like not just like he was like a fringe rotation guy and was like really used as like an energy player. Like if Duke would start slow in a game, you'd see K or you'd see Shire throw him in there just to like get a spark, you know? And honestly, some of his best minutes last season came when he played basically small ball four next to Roach, Proctor, Foster, and Filipowski, and some when they would occasionally go to these small ball lineups to open up five out. I think you made the absolutely right point that has to be hit, which is that like not a lot of like super creative combo moves. Like he wants to get downhill and he can get by guys because he's fast and he's aggressive and assertive and he's strong, but there's a limitation to sort of like the overall creativity and the amount of like windows and spaces that he's able to get into. The crack kind of has to be there. Um, he certainly benefits getting to play with a guy like Raynaud. Like
Mhm.
that's a huge help. Blake's has assisted Raynaud 25 times already this season, which is a lot. No surprise. I mean, it's a perfect fit, guard, stretch five combo. But and it's nice that again that those guys have been able to sort of like microwave some chemistry together. But obviously I think that is getting to play with a guy like that helps open up the floor, maybe makes things a little bit easier for Blake's, but he's capitalized. Like he's played terrific so far this season. Um, Not a natural shooter, like doesn't shoot like an easy ball.
No, no.
Really has to guide it. He had the right he shoots right-handed. Um, keep an eye on his right elbow when he's taking catch and shoot jumpers, like really, really angled kind of like to the side, not like a total like, not like a total bow, but just like definitely it's not like tucked, you know what I mean? Like over his knee.
Yeah, he has
Um,
a scissor kick too that comes out every now and again on
Exactly.
his three. Yeah.
And I think part of the sort of just like overall like comfort and feel on the ball that we were discussing in relation to his creativity with the dribble does sort of also like infect his like pull up shooting gather ability as well too.
Mhm.
And then again, he's not the shooting itself is like, from distances is pretty spotty, but like I would have never thought of Blake's as an NBA prospect prior to this season, that just like wasn't, he's one of those guys that because he was at Duke, like, he was certainly going to get, at least a cursory look, but to be putting up these kinds of numbers is really outstanding. And so, I'm not sure he's a guy that's like obviously going to get a shot, but I imagine he'll be on a G League roster next season. And
Yeah.
when you're in that role, you're, you know, a couple injuries away from getting a shot kind of. So it's a big opportunity for him this year. I'm glad he was able to like I mean he graduated from Duke already. He graduated in 3 years. And it was good for him that he's been able to sort of like step into this opportunity. I guess he could come back and play again next season as well. But I do think Blakes is a guy that's really done through the first 2 months of the season is really, I think put himself. There's just a season ago. There's no way we would have been talking about this guy as like a Duke prospect. There's no way. Um,
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
no way. But the long arms, the strength, the speed, and again, he is like all about the the right things, right? He's a hustle guy. He's team first. Even though he was always coming off the bench at Duke, never like was very happy to be a role guy there. Um, so I'm happy to see him sort of like step up into this role. But yeah, I mean he's very fringy, in terms of like prospect from my vantage point.
Yeah, I mine as well. I agree that he could be in the G League next year. And if D up and get downhill in the G League, there's going to be chances to finish because what they don't have are, the rim runners that some folks think are just you can just pick up off the street in the NBA, which you can't. Playing NBA defense as a center and as an anchor is very, very hard, and there's not that many of them. And that
Mhm.
means the G League those rims are there to get to if you got the athletic ability to get downhill, and Jaylen does. So hopefully he gets his chance. But
Mhm.
now let's go to a couple guys who I think have a chance to be on all conference rosters at the end of the season. One of them was on, I think, second team all conference last year, though you'll know the actual answer. I'm speaking of Hunter Sallis of Wake Forest and Jamir Watkins from Florida State. I believe Jamir was an honorable mention. I believe Hunter was first or second team. So who do you want to hit on first out of those two? Hunter is the more sort of hyped prospect, I think, for most people, but who do you want to
Mhm.
talk about?
Yeah, let's do Hunter first. Let's go ahead and do it. Yeah, I believe he was first team all conference last season and in preseason first team this year as well as he came back for his fourth year in college.
Right. So I have talked about Hunter on this podcast a couple of times. One was actually about a year ago this time. I did an episode on just guys nationally I thought were underrated. And I talked about, I think him, Devin Carter, maybe Otiga Owe,
Yeah.
PJ Hall. I think Matthew Cleveland. I also, can't, you can take the boy out of the ACC, but not the ACC out of the boy.
Man,
But
it's unfortunate what's happened with. I mean, he's stuck on this crap Miami team now too.
yeah, well,
Yeah.
yes, it is, but gotta stay on track with Hunter.
Yes, yes,
But
yes.
but I talked about him then because Hunter was a former five-star recruit who was kind of like Jaylen Blakes. He was sort of a defensive on-ball energy hound for a real top-tier program in Gonzaga, including the Gonzaga team that went, I believe undefeated and went to the Final Four and everything, like including that team. Unless that was a year before he was there. Maybe he was at least there when Chet
I think that
Holmgren was
was I
there.
think that was year before. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He and
So
Cat were in the same recruiting class.
right. So he was used, and my thought when he transferred to Wake Forest, because he's from, I believe, Winston-Salem, was that he would be sort of a very athletic guard who played a lot for them. But I wasn't expecting much in the way of like shot making or scoring talent.
Yeah.
But that's almost immediately what happened. I mean, he shot 40% from three on over 5 attempts a game last year, which is in just he shot 25% on low volume the 2 years prior. He
Mhm.
shot, I think his overall splits were 49, 40, 78, and he was really probably one of the 10 to 15 best scorers in college basketball on the perimeter last year. uh what was so interesting to me about him is he got a lot of first round buzz, went through the whole process and everything. I think eventually got a bag to come back to Wake. And where I ended on him was someone who I thought you could have drafted 25 to 45, but
Mhm.
with the understanding that in order for him to be a real contributor that you could rely on for like multiple contracts for your drafting team, he needed sort of a physical jump. Hunter
Mhm.
has good burst. and he has good pop off the ground, but he's skinny, and he was, I think, was 21 last draft cycle. He'll be 22 this draft cycle, and around like 175 pounds.
Mhm.
And at 6'5", 175, that's just a little light unless you can really be a lead guard kind of player. If you're going to be playing off of a lead guard, which I think was even the case for his most ardent supporters last year, they, projected him someone playing off of better talent, then you really got to pull your weight defensively on the perimeter. And I thought that what was so interesting about Hunter is that that's what he was used as in his sort of spare time at Gonzaga.
Yep.
And you figure, well, at Wake Forest, this scoring burden explodes. And so, yes, the defense took a step back. He would have flashes here and there, but there weren't any like two-way dominant performances. And it just left this lingering question in my head where, well, if you ratchet the usage back down and the offensive talent is in there, could the defense come back up? It's hard to answer that question this year because his scoring, burden is still very, very high. But sort of the two-way Hunter Sallis that would need to thrive at the NBA level still is not really there for Wake. His
Mhm.
numbers are very similar with the exception of his threes, which have gone. I mean, the whole Wake team has like an allergy to making
Yeah,
three-pointers so far this year, which is,
they're in a bad place shooting the ball. The ecosystem is different, and Hunter's having to play more lead guard for them this season, and I think
yeah.
that's changed up the shot diet some too. But yes, it's just like they're in a weird spell right now, and that's impact. I'm not worried about his shot. I don't think people like he's a good shooter. It's pretty obvious if you evaluate him. If you look at other statistical number indicators,
Yeah,
I think he charts out as like not like this like nuclear amazing shooter, but like very solid,
in
shooter with good with
he
some good.
shot 54% inside the arc on 8 attempts last year, a lot of those coming in mid-range,
Mhm.
and he's at 56% on 9 attempts this year. So very consistent, same amount of free throws, per game, but it's popped up from 78% to 86%. That gives you a sense of what kind of touch you're really dealing with. Still around 18 a game, 18, 4, and 3, that neighborhood right there. But threes have yet to go in. And like, to me, the question that I have, like I said, is still there, which is whether or not you can envision a role in the NBA at lower usage where his defensive activity and sort of his ability to hold up against like powerful NBA perimeter athletes is there enough to keep him on the floor and let his offensive talent out. I'm more pessimistic than I was at the end of last year. And even at the end of last year, I was kind of iffy. I think he's a second round prospect, in most mocks now. Um, but that physical question is sort of dragging me down, unfortunately. But where are you on him?
You and I are kind of in a similar neighborhood. Like I would have had sort of like mid second round grade on him for the 24 draft. So yeah, he definitely like hits in the category of guy who it makes sense to come back in the age of NIL because
Yeah.
he was, it's a big payday to come back and play in the ACC versus, a non-guaranteed second round contract. So I'm glad it's that at least has worked out for him so far this season. And yeah, you sort of touched on it, like the the way his career shifted between one school. Yeah, you see this. I think we sort of just touched on this to an extent with Jaylen Blakes, like how quickly some guy goes from being like a athlete or an energy defender type guy with one team to immediately being like a go-to scorer and a creator and a ball handler. Um, I think Salas he's a really tough shot maker. That's maybe the thing he does best. And I don't think he's like outlier good at it. And I unfortunately think like making tough mid-range shots, if that's your selling point, if that's like the thing you do best, kind of, and he's sort of like jack of all trades in a lot of ways. If
Mhm.
that's the thing you do best, it's like not enough. And then if anything, it speaks to because like those shots aren't the province of the fifth guard on a roster. Like those shots are the province of superstars, right? Those are shots.
SGA. Yeah.
Yeah, SGA take Luka Doncic. Those guys take those shots. Not Isaiah Joe, and Hunter Sallis. Like the thing that I was hoping for him this season was that he was going to either there was going to be he was going to be stronger and get into the paint more, or there was going to be like even more sort of like pull up or just sort of like nutty shooting components to him that he'd shoot maybe not like the 40% that he did last season, but there would just be more 3-point volume and that the shots would like look different. It'd be more of him like flying off of down screens, kind of him coming off of flare screens, him ghost screening into a catch, like that kind of like catch and shoot stuff. And if the shot making could sort of like he does some of that stuff, but if the shot making could sort of like translate more to that, then all of a sudden you would just have a guy that like would be able to there would be a case for him to be made for him as like an offensive guard because he could get into the paint a little bit, he could and create off of that, and that could maybe open up some of the tough shot making aspects of his game. Or there would be like the catch and shoot, just sort of like bombs away component that would like, really, I think add a little bit of intrigue to him. And like, that just hasn't got off the ground. I think the context for him this season, like I'm sure you've watched Wake this year, like it's not great. I mean, they lost their starting point guard, Boopy Miller, to SMU. He's playing well there.
Mm-hmm.
And they brought in Tyler Johnson from Louisville, and that's been like a roller coaster ride. Like he'll play 20 minutes a game and play well, and then play 5 minutes in the next game and have 6 turnovers in that span of time. And so Hunter's had to be the point guard for this team, and like he's not a full breakdown guy. He doesn't touch the paint a lot. He doesn't draw a ton of fouls. Even when he gets into the paint, he's still having to like finish off of like he's still having to like finish with like fadeaway jumpers and that kind of stuff. Like he still is not like an explosive like just get to the rim and like finish over size or draw contact. Like that's not what he does best. Wake is the team that I think on the perimeter just does not feel fast or athletic with the basketball. I like Cam Hildreth as a player. I think he's good, but he's like a post-up player on the wing.
Mm-hmm.
Davin Cosby is just like a catch and shoot guy. Parker Friedrichsen's a catch and shoot guy that can't throw it into the ocean this season. And then like that's it. And then they lost Andrew Carr to Kentucky, so they lost their
And
matchup beating.
Omaha Bilou also
Has been
out.
hurt. Has been
Yeah.
hurt.
Yeah.
And so like the offense for them, really like the baseline, like the thing that they really the one thing they've been able to rely on outside of the occasional like Efton Reed post up has been like Hunter, go make a tough shot late in the clock. And I mean, he's hitting some like the fact that he's hovering, at 56% on twos is super impressive. At least just from like a pure basketball standpoint, not from like a prospect evaluation standpoint necessarily, but like that he's hitting tough twos off the dribble late in the clock, and he's like bailing Wake out in a lot of regards. I wish it was easier for him. I wish the usage was being routed a little bit differently. He's still an awesome player, tough shot maker, big time player, and I think he has a chance to get there. But the athleticism that I thought he flashed at times at Gonzaga, that really hasn't followed him to the East Coast, and he's still slight. He's listed at 6'5", but he's not a wing. He's a 2 in the end. He's a 1 or a 2 in the NBA. By size and length standards, and I think you kind of got to be like plus either on the defensive side of the court or at like shooting the ball. And I think he's a mid-range assassin, and maybe there's reasons to buy into him being, a really serious 3-point shot maker. But like, I don't think as I was saying a few minutes ago, like I'm not worried. Him shooting 27%, like that number is like almost fake to me. I'm not worried about it, but I don't evaluate him as that kind of like nuclear catch and shoot movement shooter either. And so I think he just has a skill set that's like very much routed to him being an awesome scorer in college, but there not being like an obvious pathway for him to carve out a roster spot in the in the NBA
Yeah.
a cup of coffee or a two-way deal for a year or two, like that kind of stuff. Yeah, I could see it for sure. But making it to the second contract, like that seems a little bit more. It's hard to see right now, at least.
Is what I call an NQW, a not quite wing. Someone that sort of looks like maybe they should be a wing, maybe could have been a wing 10 years ago, but not a wing now.
Mm-hmm.
However, someone who is not that, someone who I think is a legitimate wing is Jamir Watkins. And Jamir also went through the process last draft. He's, I think, maybe a year or maybe 18 months or something older than Sallis. He's old. I think he's 23 right now.
Yeah, he's
Uh,
23 now. Yes, he is.
and
23 and a half, too.
he's always like this is the classic. If you could combine the skills of this player and this player, man, you'd have a great player, which,
Yeah, yeah.
a silly exercise. But Jamir does not have a problem getting to the rim. Jamir does not have a problem drawing fouls. As a matter of fact, Jamir Watkins, in my opinion, might be the most comfortable player in the country driving with and through and seeking out contact. It is really his mode of offense when he gets downhill. If he doesn't have a pass to make, and we'll get to his passing in a moment, then he is going to put his shoulder into you, and he is a very, very strong man. And he dares you to play good enough defense on him to not foul him. And most people can't. He, by the way, plays for Florida State. And like a lot of players who have come through Florida State in Leonard Hamilton's time, he is athletic and has very solid defensive numbers, but has issues, shooting from distance. That is sort of if he had Sallis' shot making, or Sallis
Yeah.
had Watkins's build at, 6'6" plus and, 215, then you'd be talking about a different player in both directions. But what I find so interesting about Watkins, apart from this, his crazy athleticism with the ball in his hands, is that I think his passing touch, I don't think he is the facilitator just because Florida State needs him to be. I think he has legitimately good, legitimately NBA quality vision and touch on a lot of his passes, particularly lobs, which he will throw aggressively from unconventional angles and sort of like mid dribble, will make that decision fast. He was, I think, more active in hitting a bunch of skips on the move last year, but I was impressed with his vision then. I had a late first round grade on Watkins last year, and last year was a softer class in a lot of regards. So understanding that. But I thought that this is a clear NBA athlete with clear vision and driving talent. And it's a player who I thought would be very much worth investing in to see if you could get his catch and shoot jumper up to snuff. Last year, he shot 34% on like 5 threes per 100. He has jacked his usage up, or pardon me, his shot volume up to about 9 threes per 100. He's about at 33%, but he's been a mid 70s free throw shooter again on plenty of attempts.
And for years too.
Yeah,
And for years too.
Shot over 200 free throws last year, was just under 80%, and he's already about at 125 this year. And he'll blow past 200 again if he stays healthy. So his free throw rate last year was 59%, which is a ton. And this year it's 77% at over 30 usage. This is just me reading numbers off a page, so it's hard to properly communicate how wild that is. But trust me, it's insane. So he had 23 free throws in some game like 3 weeks ago. So
game.
Yeah. So having said all that, with Jamir, he draws so much contact that he is the rare guy who, I feel like almost hasn't developed the rest of his game because he's so good at just shoving into people and getting foul calls. And that's something that I noticed with him this year, which is if someone actually can guard him and stay in front of him, is he going to rise up and hit a mid-range jumper, or is he just going to try to kick it out? Does he actually have comfort there in doing that? Which is something that I maybe overlooked last year because I was so enamored with the physical profile. Uh, do you see any area in which you feel like he's grown this year relative to last year? How do you feel overall about Mr. Watkins?
Yeah, I just think sort of like stepping into a large, we already had a big offensive role a season ago, but has stepped into a larger role this season. I mean, they're like the offensive context for them is not great. Like it really is
No.
just him and Malik Ewan, right? Like it's their two-man game. And Ewan's had he's had some good games for them so far this season. But yeah, like he's at the top of the scouting report, and he still is getting into the rim and getting into the paint every game. Um, 8.8 fouls drawn per 40 minutes this season. It's number one in the country, according to Ken Palm. He's drawing 4.2 shooting fouls per 40 minutes. That's in the 99th percentile nationally. No surprise at
Yeah.
all with that. And yeah, he's a tank. Like I really, when they played NC State a few weeks ago, that's a game I watched live, and I cut the film afterwards too. He had 17 free throw attempts in that game, and it was the game
Yeah.
after they played Tulane. He had 23 free throw attempts. So in this 2 game span, he took 40 free throws, which is just like crazy stuff. And look, he maybe got a call or two or whatever, but I mean, a lot of that too is like he's just got the physical profile to just bully guys and play through them, and draw contact. And he's trying to, he's also a thing he's trying to do. Um, and again, it's absolutely the best offense that Florida State has. So just him getting to play on the ball as like a lead guy a little bit more, I think there's something to that. I think defensively, like he continues to hum as just like a super impactful defender. And Florida State is like the last, handful of seasons has always been kind of like a weird team to sort of like try to evaluate defense, right? Because
Mhm.
they're again, for the last 5 or 6 years, they switch everything. They're super aggressive in the passing lanes. They press a lot. So this is a team that forces turnovers. They make teams go late the shot clock. They blow up a lot of actions off the ball because of their switching, but they can also give up a lot of threes. When they don't have the sort of like the communicators like Devin Vassell and Trent Forrest flying around out there and calling stuff out and making plays behind the scenes, like it doesn't, when it's humming, it can be this like impossible, beehive defense to deal with. Last few years, like it hasn't been quite like that. And so they're a team that you can move the matchups around and get behind them and spray out for threes and stuff like that. Um, but Watkins, I think, independent of like the sort of like the chaos of FSU system, super impactful defender. I mean, he guards a bunch of guys in college. He literally every game guards 1 through 5 for Florida State. He'll often start on the opposing four, but he's going to end up guarding every position. The blocks and seals numbers have always been good for him. In that physical profile, you touched on it, like 6'7", 215, strong, like that checks boxes that not every wing that we're going to discuss does. My concern for him, aside from like where does the shot land, there are reasons to feel decent about it, but it's just like, is he like, he's 23 and just physically dominant, and just sort of like once those competitive advantages level out a little bit, then what do you have? Like what's this guy's, what does his offense look like, as you were sort of touching on, sort of like a lesser usage, more off ball role. Where does he create from? How does he play off the ball? Can he handle that sort of stuff? And
Mhm.
I'm not sure I'm seeing like enough of that. I'm very intrigued with Jamir Watkins as a prospect. And like I believe in him because the physical profile, the tools, the strength, the aggression. And I think there are a handful of teams in the league that would see him hit those physical benchmarks, in terms of his profile, and they would just say we'll grab him and we'll just figure the other stuff out. Let's see if we can turn this guy into like an NBA wing. Um, so I'm in on Watkins, but I am a little worried that it could go bust pretty easily too because of the shot and just sort of like what a like scaled down offensive role might look like for him when he's not just given, because it's both a strength and it's both a pro and a con for him that like the offense at FSU is just like predicated on him getting into the paint, you know?
Right. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Is that like, and you put it best by talking about what does he look like off the ball, which will be the case in the NBA. I think the player in the NBA that comes to mind most immediately is someone like Najee Marshall.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and Najee is no longer with his drafting team, but he got a second contract and a real one, and he's playing rotation minutes for a really good team right now when he comes back from his suspension, that is.
Hmm.
But like a highly respected player who is one of the few players in the league who can credibly say that uh, their main contribution is defensive. This is something I said on a guest spot on the Strickland the other night, which I think that episode will come out probably by the time this one's out. But so few players in the NBA are actually primarily defensive contributors first because the offensive bar in the NBA is so high that usually, vast majority of the time, what your contribution to your team tilts more to your offensive productivity than it does to your defensive productivity. Najee is not that way because of his communication and because of his
Hmm.
versatility and his strength at the point of attack, his ability to switch, his ability to rebound. Uh, and I feel like Jamir, you mentioned what happens when the usage isn't there. I'm intrigued as to what happens defensively when the usage scales
Hmm.
down because that activity should come up. You know,
Yeah.
it's sort of that Sallis question that Sallis doesn't really have the physical profile to cash in on, but Watkins really does.
Hmm.
And I like even in that NC State game, which is really the game Florida State needed in this early season as a road game in conference and blew. You know, they were up for most of the last 10 minutes of that game. And in the last, like they ended up losing in overtime. And there were a couple shots that I saw him pass up and he just sort of went in expecting to get a call because he'd gotten 17 free throws to that point and it wasn't there at the end of the game. And that's sort of what
Yeah.
I mean about having counters. But regardless, if he's around like NBA offensive talent and he can really lock in defensively, I think his numbers could be even better. Like when I see him now, and you're right with the age being on his side, you know, playing a lot of guys younger than him. I still see him defending upright a lot more than he needs to. Uh, and I think that is sort of a byproduct of his offensive burden that he's trying to save himself a little bit.
Hmm.
But if you imagine a defensive sort of profile for him where he can legitimately handle point of attack and get around screens and switch off and communicate and make life uncomfortable for NBA guards, then there's going to be a lot more tolerance for
Hmm.
a developing shot. And so that's why, like, if any team believes that their shooting coach is worth the money they're getting paid, then Jameer's a guy who they should be paying attention to. I don't
Hmm.
know if I'm going to have him ultimately in the first round at the end of the year because I do want to sort of see where the shooting ends up and see where sort of the Florida State offense ends up. It's right that the talent is not great. But nonetheless, I would like to see a 23-year-old Jamir Watkins lead them to like some notable conference wins. I don't think
Hmm.
they're that you know it's too much to ask of that. So I want to see sort of just the overall productivity profile, but there is a chance he ends up in my first round just because if you hit on that guy and it's very clear what he needs to be an NBA player. If you can coach that up and hit on him, then you have like a very, very valuable piece. That is real upside to me. And so that's why I'm probably going to be a bit more aggressive than most on where I place him, you know, on my board at the end of the day.
That's fair. Again, I like I'm probably a little bit lower, but like I like Jameer a lot. They play Clemson in Pittsburgh. back to back in like 2 weeks.
Hmm.
And those are two like probably top 25, top 30 defenses that can both do some different stuff in terms of guarding the pick and roll. I'll be very curious to see. Like those will be like good games to evaluate Watkins' offensive performance. And again, like because of the priority put on like defensive wings who can like walk and chew gum at the same time too. Like he maybe I'm like a little biased with this sort of stuff because like watching and covering the Hornets, I saw both of the Martin twins
Yeah.
sort of like, both get to their second contract. They're probably going to end up getting maybe even getting third contracts eventually.
I think
Um,
Caleb is on his third
on his
contract,
third,
I believe.
and
Yeah.
and I think Cody is. I think he has one more year after this one. Like he's definitely going to get another deal. Um, so yes, and like those were guys like their usage was like much was different in college at Nevada than at NC State than Jamir's was. But like fifth year wings who came out. Yeah, I mean Cody's only like kind of figured out a jump shot. Like it's never really been like it's sort of been pretty shaky with him for at times. But a guy that could guard a couple different positions, was 6'7", fit this athletic profile, could be pesky defensively, and could occasionally, run a ball screen when you needed him too. So like there are pathways for like this, older wings, to sort of like find their way in the NBA. So I again I have some Watkins stock and I will I'll be curious to sort of see those again, Clemson and Pitt, two games to keep an eye on with him in January, I would say.
And two teams to discuss right now.
Sure.
Now, you like when I spoke to you about this episode, you mentioned specifically brought up Ian Shefflin's name.
Hmm.
And Ian is Clemson senior who, was part of that Elite Eight run last year. PJ Hall was sort of their quote unquote star. But Schieffelin, I think, went for 14-9 in the tournament during that run and is the best rebounder in the conference and is someone who they run a lot of stuff through, has some shooting touch, started this season sort of down from three, but those numbers have started to tick up again, and just sort of an endlessly physical, very smart 6'8", 220-pound forward. I'm going to
Hmm.
kick it to you on Schieffelin because I want to hear what your theory is of him at the next level because I think it's very interesting. But tell me what you see with Ian Schieffelin apart from sort of like a first team all conference performer because that is where he's going to end up.
Yeah, it's like it's the hypothetical stretch component. It's a guy like that who has that kind of like that strength and like ability to like come in and really like be a dynamic rebounder and sort of like tilt the glass to your side of the floor. But then, okay, well, what's he doing on the offensive side of the court too? I think there's stuff that you could see him, because he can stretch and he can handle the ball a little bit. But like I think you could find roles for him where he's playing the four. Cause that's kind of what he's going to have to be. Like he's 6'7", 6'8", and like he's a decent, I think, athlete, but below the rim
Mm-hmm.
and a guy that's not really, blocks a fair share of shots, but it's not in like, they're not like in like pure like rim protection stuff where he's just coming in and erasing things. Like he's a four. Um, but you're using him as a guy that in theory he'd be a guy that you could play off the ball, he could space, and you'd also use him as a screen roll partner too, and a guy that could short roll, get into space, make decisions off that. Um, could occasionally give you dives to the rim, but ultimately he'd be there to like pick and pop and be a ball mover for you, which is sort of like I don't know. That's maybe not like the sort of like sexiest offensive role, but I think there's potentially something there because like he plays with pop and force too. Like he's incredibly strong. He moves pretty fast. I think like laterally. Well, I don't think of
Mm-hmm.
him as like an explosive athlete. He's sort of like for a guy that's like kind of like as wide as he is, I think he's sort of like surprising with how fast he moves at times. Um, Incredibly strong, great positional rebounder, good out of area rebounder. And I don't think the rebounding is sort of like enough to be like the thing that he holds his to be like a selling point for him, but like it's a big part of it, right? That he does come in and he could help you on the glass and then give you some a little bit of stretch. I'm not sure I see like an NBA role for him down the line, but he's an excellent college player. And there's like if you squint, maybe there's a possibility to see some. I think there's an archetype for him. You know what I mean? Like there's like a dime store PJ Washington, like that, like that kind of sort of like under the rim for although PJ can obviously do some damage above the rim too, but just like it's the like the threat as like a screener, I guess is sort of more what I'm going for, right? Like the fact that he could pick and pop, he could short roll, he can make plays on the short roll, he can pass a little bit. Like those would be the things that I would be like selling for him. And like he's not like a guy that you just give the ball to and he can just isolate and go one on one. But if you give him the ball in space, like with a head of steam, he'll plow through guys going to the rim. So
Right.
he's got some juice with the ball. So he's not like a stiff either, too.
That's that last point that I wanted to follow up with you on. First of all, when we talk about a little bit of stretch, he only shot three threes per 100 last year, which is not much at all. Now he hit 47% of his attempts. He was 23 of 49, which is great, but the volume was low. This year he's up. He's already attempted 41 threes, but only hit like 32% of them. So who knows? And his free throws are like mid 70s. But what I've noticed is that he takes deep ones frequently. He takes NBA range above the break threes pretty frequently as part of his diet, which is a good sign. Sometimes that might maybe cover up for the fact that you don't have the quickest release in the world, but it's 6'8". You don't need the quickest release in the world anyway, so I'm not too worried about that. There is a class of player that we're not going to discuss too much like in this episode for this draft class, but there is a class of player in this year's class that are defensively versatile players who are very good rebounders and who have some passing facility, very strong, with like a clear shooting question. And Schieffelin is sort of, I don't want to say the dime store version of these guys, but he is sort of like the tier down. Discount version, maybe more acceptable. But one of them, which is a guy that he matched up with in a very entertaining game a couple weeks ago, is Colin Murray Boyles, South Carolina.
Yeah.
Okay. And that game was really interesting to me.
That was
really
a banger.
interesting.
That was a banger of a game.
It was. I mean, apart from the geographic, like the crowd was locked into it from the jump, and a really, really fun game. But what stuck out to me about that game is that like Murray Boyles got into foul trouble in that game. And in the last 10 minutes, I forget if that game went into overtime or not.
I think it did, actually.
I think it did. South Carolina ended up winning this game. But the last 10 minutes of regulation, like Schieffelin's thing is that he overpowers people, that he's surprisingly quick, that he's this incredible rebounder. Like he is used to being able to just inhale those sort of physical advantages against ACC competition. And Murray Boyles has a lot of the same physical traits and was just clearly more skilled as an offensive player than Schieffelin was in that game. And I thought that Murray Boyles was the best player on the floor in that game. It's no real secret that Murray Boyles is ranked as a higher prospect than Schieffelin no matter anywhere you look. But it was just good to see it play out on the court where both guys played very, very hard. I think Schieffelin had like 20 rebounds in that game, something insane. But even though Murray Boyles was in foul trouble, he still had sort of the poise and the passing skill and the touch inside the arc to really give it to Schieffelin when he was matched up on him. So if anyone has the opportunity to go back and watch that game, please do so. If for nothing else, to see what all the hype about Murray Boyles is about. But Schieffelin, to his credit, played a very good, hard-nosed, rugged, productive game in, a hostile environment. Still really, really good. I mean, this is a guy like maybe the 20 rebounds he had was against Kentucky. They
It
played
was just
Kentucky and
Kentucky.
beat Kentucky.
Yeah.
So Clemson is no joke, and Schieffelin is their best player. I hear footsteps in my head ever since Jaime Jaquez ended up being like an actual NBA player, because I looked at Jaquez and thought that he was not just explosive enough of an athlete to really hang, and that he wasn't quite good enough of a shooter to really hang. And here he is, he was rotation player basically from day one. The difference to me between Jaquez and Schieffelin is that Jaquez, it's that ISO thing that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Schieffelin can head a steam in space, sure. If he's down in the post, he can just sort of like bang you and try to, finish maybe on the other side of the rim or pump fake and get a call or something like that. And he's good at that stuff. But Jaquez had a legitimate post footwork bag where he could face up starting on the perimeter and finish at the rim, and go into a post up from anywhere on the floor, work as a passer. He had a complete offensive game, something closer to what Murray Boyles has. And Schieffelin just does not have that extra component. That's even if that shot ends up being mid to high 30s, profile for a 6'8", rebounding machine, which is good. I still don't think that he can credibly keep a good offense humming with his decision making and ability to attack from like off the dribble from the perimeter in. Like being able to go into a DHO is great when in college the other offense isn't going to punish you that much for defaulting to that action. But I just think you need a little bit more at 6'8" than he's got. Having said that, I'm not going to write him off as someone who can catch on somewhere, because like you said, like that physical profile and the ability to shoot and rebound, like that is something real. I thought about Murray Boyles and I thought about Jaquez and where Schieffelin sort of falls in the mix between them. And I think that's sort of how I feel about him, is that he's neither fish or fowl really out of
Yeah.
those two archetypes.
Yeah, the processing and like wing skills of a Jaquez, or just like the processing and like interior finishing of CMB. Like that's like Schieffelin's really good, but like he's not like on par with those guys. And
Right.
in that capacity, yeah, that Kentucky game was crazy because like it was probably like a C level game for him, and he still had 20 rebounds, 4 assists, and took 8 threes. Like there's not a lot, like there aren't too many guys that will like give you that kind of like stat line. You were talking about the sort of like longer threes he's made so far this season. He's 7 of 17 on threes from 25 feet or further out. So
Yeah.
41, not a ton of volume. But my guess is like the 3-pointers, it's going to trend up for him, and he's going to end up in the mid 30s on decent volume. So again, he strikes me more as like a very, very useful, good college player that can do a lot of stuff for you offensively. But if you want if he was like if he was Raynaud's size, if he was 7'1",
Well, of course, yeah.
certainly we're having, or even if he was 6'10" and long arms, like we're having a different conversation. But I just think he's a little boxed in, even with the shot being somewhat of like a chip for him.
Yeah, his teammate Chauncey Wiggins is like a little interesting to me as well. The
I
name that floated around in my head as I was going through Clemson tape watching him was just Jabari Smith Jr. Kind of
Mhm.
plays and moves in a similar way, but is like 6'7", 6'8", not 6'11".
Mhm.
But same quick trigger, as a catch and shoot player. Can attack a closeout a little bit, can switch and contest a little bit, but just sort of not just sort of the level of athlete that he is, but could be someone that gets a look. I don't know if
Yeah,
you feel strongly about anyone else on that Clemson roster, but
the
he was
Wiggins is
interesting a little to me.
Wiggins is the like I've had eyes on Wiggins for a few years just because 6'9" and get like with some,
6'9".
with
Pardon
some,
me. Yeah.
6'9", 6'10", but has the ability to shoot threes. It does feel like this season they're kind of giving him like he's like sort of like playing with the ball a little bit more too. And I think that's cool to see him sort of like spread his wings. I mean, Clemson is like on the sneak, like a really like fun half court offense to watch. Like it's like relatively like sophisticated offense, but for the most part, they just like they do stuff that makes sense. And again, Wiggins, like we probably need to talk more about him in like 12 months, but a guy like that with that size and length who can guard and do some stuff defensively and has some shooting upside, like guys like that probably just strictly as like a 3 and D guy, like deserves maybe a bit of a look. I like Victor Locken as like a 5 who can do a bunch of different stuff offensively, opens up some 5-out stuff, can run high low, can pass. I'm not really sure I see a real like an NBA prospect here, but he's the guy that I think will like play professionally, for a long time, maybe across in Europe. And I like Chase Hunter's a good guard, like a really
He
good
is a
college
good
guard.
guard. He's
But
fun.
I don't I think he's topping out as like good productive 2A ACC guard. I'm not sure I see much more in terms of like NBA upside for him, but nice, very nice college player.
Yeah. Yeah, good. Yeah, I think that is all appropriate for them.
Hmm.
So Pittsburgh, who I think if Duke and UNC are again the top two teams in the ACC are projected to be, I mean UNC's had their issues this year, but Pitt to me, Pitt and Clemson are probably the next two teams in some order, in my opinion, anyway. Um, and I like Pitt a lot from what I've watched of them. They speaking of bangers, they played a very entertaining game against Ohio State that they won at the buzzer, kind of
Crazy game,
like
crazy finish.
semi miracle finish for them.
Yeah, it was.
And they have a few players. I mean, they have Jaylen Lowe, who I didn't know his stepfather was John Lucas, which I found out by watching that game. But like really good pick and roll point guard who can do a little bit of everything. Very smart, very tight handle, solid burst, a little undersized, but like a very good college point guard who could like one day maybe be first team all ACC. But
Mhm.
I don't really see the physical strength and like necessarily the shooting talent for him to
Not yet, at
leave
least.
early, but like
Yeah.
someone to watch. Uh, his teammate, who is older, a fifth-year senior Ishmael Leggett, who is another like complete bucket off the dribble, and someone who's like Leggett, I think, is shooting over 75% at the rim as like a 6'3" guard, which is insane. But uh, a really just tough guard who will put 25 or 30 on you if you don't have some sort of a game plan to stop him. But Leggett is also, again, apart from not being a wing, is someone who has sort of that chicken wing kind of shot you were talking about with Jaylen Blakes. His looks better than Blake's does, but another guy who's like been low 30s from three for 4 years and sort of mid 70s from the line is just not quite the shooter that I think he would need to be to get like a real NBA chance.
Mhm.
However, and I can't believe I'm coming back to this guy because I think you know who I'm thinking of.
I definitely do.
They have a very low usage wing who started his career at High Point, which is, a university in North Carolina, who is from Winston-Salem, named Zack Austin. Now, Zack ordinarily would not be an NBA prospect by now. I mean, he's 23, but
Mhm.
the fact that he is sporting as like a fifth-year senior a 14% usage rate would like lead you to say like absolutely not. Like get him out of here. What are you talking about? Like can this man dribble? Yes or no? Um and that's all fair. But
Yeah.
we're deep in this episode, and I wanted to mention him because he has always been an NBA athlete on the wing.
Yep.
And He's their best sort of perimeter defender. He has like a 6+ block rate and an over 2 steal rate. I think last year he was a 6 block rate and just under a 2 steal rate. But don't let sort of a middling steal rate fool you. Like, he can absolutely switch onto very good guards and hold his own. Uh, except this year, he was sort of a 3-point shooter at high point. He took them, but he was lower volume last year, his first year playing, Power 5 ball. And now all of a sudden, he, I believe, is over 40% from three on pretty solid volume and is like mid 80s from the line. I think he's 24 of 28 from the line. And he hit that above the break buzzer beating three to beat Ohio State on the road. That was him. And I think he hit like 3 or 4 threes in that game.
He hit some bombs against
So,
in Columbus. Yeah, he did.
like, he's not what Hinson was last year from three. Like,
Most people aren't that kind of just absurd. We should have mentioned him earlier when talking about like the Monsanto,
right,
Smith,
right.
just like ACC 3-point gunners from the last couple of years.
But this level of, like, we'll see where the shooting ends up over the rest of the season, but it has been good enough and he has been willing enough to shoot them that I'm at least going to pay attention to it for the rest of the year. Anytime you're this much of an athlete and you can shoot threes and you're confident shooting them, and that Ohio State performance will have him confident for months, like, he has my attention. And it sounds silly to make excuses for usage this tiny, but you mentioned it earlier with Diaz Graham as sort of a 5 who can make decisions off the dribble on closeouts or in the short roll. All of the usage in Pitt is already accounted for, structurally. Yeah. And they have some very good decision makers. This is a good, in my opinion, pretty sophisticated offense that they run. And if there's a way for Zack Austin to work, it's that he is learning to fit in to a good offense with good offensive talent. And ordinarily, I think the discussion about NBA translation almost goes the other way. It's almost like the worse your context in college, the more optimistic people are that you're some hidden gem at the NBA level, because it's like, oh, well, he's going to play with amazing talent, not terrible talent. If you want to contrast to Jamir Watkins in the offensive system that he's in. I have a theory that it's not quite that simple, that learning to play off of good talent is a skill in and of itself. And learning to assimilate into an offense that requires very quick decisions is something that you kind of need to have in your bag before you get to the NBA. There are plenty of guys to go through who've been very sort of physical wing-sized players who played in unsophisticated college offenses. And it's very hard for those guys to translate to the NBA level because, there's just a level of decision-making and awareness and processing, possession to possession, pass to pass, in the NBA that they're not used to. Austin, at least among low usage wings, has been exposed to a little bit of that in Pittsburgh. And I like that for him. I'm not predicting anything for it. I'm just keeping it in my back pocket. But you go further back with Austin than I do. We've been messaging about him for years. So talk to me about him and what you love about him. I'm sorry if I sort of, stole your thunder on him, but go ahead.
No, I think it's good. I mean, it's interesting. Like, I've spent a lot of time around High Point in the Big South Conference. I've been a color analyst for them this season and some in the past as well.
Hell yeah, man.
So, and it's like when Austin was there, he was more of like a do-it-all kind of forward, right? Like he could do a bunch of different stuff. The defensive, impact numbers were there. Played with the ball more. So like he's scaled his offensive role way down, coming to an ACC program. I think he's in year 2 and he's once again just like nailing his role for Pitt. I think actually there's a lot of guys at Pitt that are just like doing exactly like what Jeff Capel wants from them. Um, and ultimately that's why they're like a pretty kick-ass team and I think gonna, rack up wins this season in the ACC. I think that at the body, the athletic profile are like we can all look at that stuff and it charts, looks good. You can see the block numbers, they look great. You got to watch this guy play on the defensive side of the court. That's what I used to do last season when he got the Pitt. He in my view, he was one of the like 6 or 7 best defenders in the ACC last year. Um, he's like in the right place often. He rotates really well and he like packs punch, right? Because he's very disruptive off-ball defender. Um, 6'7", long, 210 pounds, good vertical athlete, blocks shots that like a lot of college wings don't get to, close out threes, chase down ones in transition. Um, really like stuff that'll make you sort of like pause the film on your computer, just be like, whoa, he got to that. So like he has some sort of like um outlier plays in terms of like ground coverage for like a 6'7" wing and like being able to like get to and if not like block at least like alter certain shots. The shooting this season, it's like I need to see, it's been 12 games. I just need to see more of it. Obviously he's shot the heck out of the ball so far from three and from the line. If he does this for a full season, then it's like, I don't think he's like a he's a guy that you bring into summer league and training camp. Maybe you see if something's there, but just like if teams are looking for wings that can like do some stuff with the basketball, can shoot, can defend. I'm not sure he's hitting the mark on all of those things. Um, but if the shot holds up for a full season, then you can advocate for him as like a potential like buy low, 3-and-D type guy to bring into your system, knowing there's some athletic and defensive upside that he can provide as well. But I just need to see more of it. He definitely benefits from playing next to Jaylen Lowe, who's been awesome this season. Like Jaylen Lowe has been a total boss for
Hmm.
for uh, for Pittsburgh. And look, last season you and I talked about Bub Carrington a lot, and it's pretty. I mean, heck of a recruiting class for Jeff Capel to bring Carrington and Jaylen Lowe and his 2 freshman guards in the same class. Um, but I think one of the last early last year, Carrington came out of the gate hot as this like awesome pull up shooter playing point guard for Pitt. And I think, he hit a bit of a wall. I think Pitt found their stride and Carrington even found a good role for him as more of like kind of like an attacking guard when as opposed to just being like the, heliocentric type lead guard because Lowe came in and just like he made a difference for them as a lead ball handler. And that allowed Carrington to sort of like get off the ball, like start possessions off the ball, then go into a handoff, then attack the coverage, as opposed to having to, let teams load up on him in the pick and roll. Lowe is insanely fast, quick with the basketball. I think I think it was the LSU game this season early on. Whomever it was, they were trying to hedge ball screens against Jaylen Lowe, and he was he was too fast. Like they could not do it. He was still turning the corner on the like the opposing center who was out there hedging the screen and able to turn the corner and get downhill. And obviously, when he's able to get into the paint, Austin really benefits from those kick out looks, right? And like him as being this like low usage spot up guy on the wing, him playing with one of the best point guards in the country, which is what Jaylen Lowe has been so far this season, has been a big benefit. Um, I wish there was like a little bit more like shot versatility with Austin. It's a lot of like if there's any movement, it's pretty slight. You know what I mean? Like it's like
Hmm.
relocate a couple of feet to your right, couple of feet to your left.
Yeah, he
They're,
has no usage. So
yeah,
yeah.
but it's not even like the Blake Hinson, like, oh, he's coming off of down screens, or you're drawing up like actions for him. You know what I mean? Like he is there as like a spacing agent for their
Hmm.
offense, and he's again, like I said, he's nailing the role. Um, but that alone sort of maybe has me even like a little bit more cautious with him. But I believe in him as a defender and an athlete. And if he's going to keep shooting the ball like this, then he's going to, he deserves at least a look, from teams who are looking for, cheap wing depth or whatever. And yeah, I think he made it like I believe in Pitt as like a sophisticated and functional offense in the same way I kind of like do with Clemson. Like the things they do make sense to me, and I see what they're going for, and the pieces fit really nicely. Um, in Austin's ability to like space it around like the pick and roll playmaking of Lowe, and then just like the front court playmaking talent of Guillermo Diaz-Graham and Cam Corrin, who's played really well for Pitt this season.
Yeah, he has.
Over,
Yeah.
he and Graham have been a really nice, front court duo. They're both like 4.5s kind of in college. Um, if Corrin could shoot it a little bit more, there'd maybe be something with him there. But like he can guard pick and roll in a bunch of different ways. He can really pass on the short roll, like really pass on the short roll. Um, and so I like the fit with he and Graham, but Austin's ability to be like the lower usage shooter has, I think, really allowed those two guys in the front court to fit and make sense with Lowe and Leggett, as the two sort of like high usage guards. So it's a fun team to watch. And there's several guys on the roster that like at least deserve like a tip of the cap, and like it's or not a tip of the cap, but just like um you gotta like kind of like put like a bookmark next to their names because they're
Yeah.
guys that have some NBA potential. And like Lowe, he's at least like shooting the ball a little bit more this season from deep and pull up shots, but it's not quite there yet. If it ever does get there, then yeah, like there's because he gets into the paint, he can pass. I know he's small, but like energy guard who can help create offense for you off the bench. I mean, he play like they use him like college campaign. You know what I mean? Like that's the sort of like lefty, quick, fast guard, can turn the corner, create advantages. Um, and again, he's like willing to take, dribble handoff threes, pick and roll threes, fade away, pull up twos. So if this guy ever gets to the point where he's like starting to like really make tough shots, I think he's has the chance to become an NBA guard because he's instant advantage creation with his handle, his speed, and he can't make every pass because he's smaller and undersized, but like he makes a lot
I
of
mean, he makes a lot of
he
them.
makes a
And
lot of passes. He makes a lot
I
of
sold him short earlier by saying I thought he could be a future first team all ACC guard. He could potentially be that this year.
this
Like
year.
they're
Yeah, I think he right now he is. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Like, there's a lot of basketball to be played the next 2 to 3 months, but so far, yeah, he has been so far.
Um, so we have discussed, I mean, if you count Zack Austin, and I count Zack Austin, we have discussed guys who I think are basically auto eligible for the draft or who we expect to declare this season, basically. There are still a handful of players. Uh, I'm thinking of the guys on North Carolina, Ian Jackson, Drake Powell, uh, Andraj Stojakovic on Cal, or Andre. Anyway, Peja Stojakovic's son on Cal, and Jacob Cofie. Cofie's how you say his last name, correct? Or
Yeah,
Coffee?
at Virginia, yeah.
Cofie of Virginia. Those are the ones that are in my head as underclassmen who I think could receive some interest from teams, though I don't know if I would put any one of them as like more than 50% likely in the age of NIL to actually declare and enter the draft. But who out of that group do you think is most likely to actually get their name called on draft night 2025 and why?
Powell and Drake Powell at UNC, and mostly just because of like the physical tools. I mean, it took him Hubert Davis felt compelled to really roll with Jalen Withers there for the first month of the season as UNC's, primary four. But it's Drake Powell's job for the most part. He's in the offensive role that he's in right now is interesting because they're very guard heavy this year, right? I mean, they've got RJ Davis, this incredible shot maker who's been up and down so far this season. Ian Jackson, who's another guy you could make a case for here, really nice shot maker who's had some big scoring games. Seth Trimble, who's made a jump, and Elliot Cadeau, who seems to have not really made the jump that some were hoping for, but is still like important for them as a driver and a passer and a ball handler. So they've got a lot of guards, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there tend to be a lot of possessions where Powell is just sort of like there spotting up in the corner or like he's on the second side. And that's fine because like honestly, really like his catch and go game. Like I think there's like he's got the ability to catch, stutter rip or jab and then plant and go. And his speed in a straight line with the basketball at 6'6", 200 pounds, long arms, and his ability to jump is intriguing. I'd like to see him have the opportunity, and I don't believe we'll get to see it this year. For him to sort of like play make with the ball a little bit. I think there's some interesting face up stuff he can do where he can catch and can do his jab and rocker step game. But for the most part, like he's receiving the ball off the catch, and playing out of that. And so it's great that he's playing next to all these amazing guards who can, in theory, sort of like set the table for him. Um, but yeah, he's a little limited in terms of like what his role has been so far this year. I'll be curious to see if that grows a little bit, if he gets to like play make with the ball some more. There have been moments, I would say, in the Alabama game and in the UCLA game. Like he only has a couple assists so far this season, but he's had some nice live ball, pocket pass uh, flashes and reads that he's shown. So I think he's got some sort of like heads up live ball playmaking that I like. Um, and then the rebounding numbers aren't amazing, but pull up the UCLA film and watch that. Like he has some possessions where like he's as a 6'6", 6'7" guy, he's controlling the glass, like playing above the rim, getting stuff out of his area. So I would say Powell just because of like the blue chip, 5-star recruit pedigree mixed with the sort of like athletic profile that he fits as a wing that could play and guard a couple of different positions, could impact on the glass, can give you a little bit of weak side rim protection, has shown some positives as a catch and shoot guy, as a shooter, and then has the ability to attack closeouts too. So Powell would be the next guy. But I suppose you could make a case for Ian Jackson too, just with like the
Well,
shot making
yeah.
upside. But I would say Powell.
How big do you think Ian Jackson is, like in person that you've seen?
I haven't seen him. I've not been to a
Oh,
game
because
in
they've been
Chapel Hill.
traveling all around, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
I
yeah,
haven't I
yeah.
haven't seen him in Chapel Hill yet. I mean, they list him at I think 6'4", 190.
I know.
But I don't know. So you think he's more in like the 6'2" and a half kind of range?
I mean, I've seen him listed
170.
at 6'1" on a different website. When like
Okay.
when I watch him, I maybe 6'2", yeah,
Yeah.
but not 190. I don't think he's
Yeah.
190. I
Yeah.
mean, that like he's interesting to me because for all of the attributes you just listed of Powell and sort of the in-between skills, I mean, Powell's still like a really low usage guy, averaging, I don't know,
Yeah.
with like 5 or 6 points a game.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
In this crazy schedule that UNC has played, and they've played as competitive a schedule as any team in the country has played
Mhm.
to this point. They have played let's see, Power 5 games at Kansas, neutral site Auburn, neutral site Michigan State, home against Alabama, home against Georgia Tech, neutral site Florida, neutral site UCLA. it is not an exaggeration to say they could have played every team that will end up in the Final Four already on their schedule. That is possible. And in those games that I just listed, Ian Jackson, despite starting none of them, has failed to crack double digits just one time.
Mhm.
And like for someone who is physically a little bit slighter, that is unbelievably impressive. That
Mhm.
he has the confidence to shoot as much as he does, and he has a quick trigger, and boy is he confident with it. And he clearly isn't scared of the stage. Yeah, he's not going to be in any more hostile of a stage, except maybe in Durham, than what he's faced already this year, considering quality of opponent. And he is someone who I see like the more playing time he gets, and his playing time's gone up. He averaged about 15 minutes a game the first 5 games, and he's averaged about 25 cents.
He's going to start stealing more of Cadeau's playing time.
He just he
It's
looks
happening.
better every
Yeah,
time I see him.
yeah, it's
And
happening.
he's not a natural distributor, but he has enough of a bag, even at his frame, to get downhill and at least have sort of like a shot maker kind of bag. He's
Mhm.
not afraid to get into the paint and try to mix it up and find contact. Uh, and he just, I don't know. He's interesting. In past years, I would not really have given him a second thought for this upcoming draft year. And I'd be like, this is a multi-year guy. He's got to physically develop, blah, 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 blah. And even though he's not as thick and strongly built as Jared McCain was last year, McCain's like immediate success at the NBA level has made me rethink sort of like undersized off-ball guards who I think are serious, serious
Mhm.
shooting talents. And I think that Jackson has a chance to be that. So I don't know if I would say that Jackson's more likely than Powell. It's too early for me to say that, but I think Jackson has been more integral, at least I mean, success might be a stretch, but maybe to their competitiveness in these games than Powell has been. He's claimed more of a role.
Yep.
And that is very notable to me about him. But anything else about Jackson that you want to mention or that you want to say?
Yeah, I mean his motor runs hot on both sides of the court
Very hot.
too. And like
Yeah.
he's you could see in the UCLA game like he had some issues against some of the when he was matched up. UNC's playing so many of these three guard looks, and I've usually Seth Trimble, who's a good athlete with long arms, like he's sort of like the de facto three in a lot of these looks. But if Jackson's having to get matched up against a 6'8" wing or whatever, like it's tough for him when he's just getting bulldozed by screens. But like he tries really hard at the point of attack. He tries really hard chasing guys off of down screens. I like that. And then like as soon as they get a stop, like he's the first guy running down, like because he is such a shot maker and the meter's always running for him. Like he's flying down the court, filling the corners, trying to get kick out threes. Like he's just hunting, and he knows that Davis and Cadeau and Trimble, like those guys are pushing the ball. And he's looking for a shot. He hasn't done much else other than that. And um I think a lot of that just has to do with like context and situation. Like if he was
I
at
think so too.
if he was playing for NC State, he'd be a 25% usage, 20% assist guy. You know what I mean? Like that kind of role. Again, very predicated on the jump shot. That's really been the thing that's going for him, but he's just shooting the heck out of the ball and making big time shots and with a fair amount of versatility off the catch, off the dribble, step backs, creating the space, gets can get to his spots even without a screen. Either off movement or off in isolation. So yeah, there's absolutely something here. Like his shooting and scoring upside is crazy. And it's also one of the reasons too why like I'm not I think people were like you the point you started when we shifted to UNC, like there's been a lot I live in North Carolina and like there's been a lot of like noise with people being worried that the sky's falling in Chapel Hill. Like you listed all of those awesome opponents they've played so far this season. I think in all but the Alabama game, like they could have won all of those games. Bama's
Yeah.
the one. Bama went into the Dean Dome and beat the crap out of them, and like Alabama will do that. They'll come in and just hit a bunch of threes and light your gym on fire, and like you don't really have a chance to win the
Yeah,
match.
you don't know what hit you. Yeah.
But all
Although
those
Jackson was one of the most competitive guys for UNC in that game. He scored
he was
23 in that game
it
and just
was
scored 24 against UCLA.
in a game that had a ton of NBA guards on the court or guys that are like our professional guards, right?
Right, right,
Between
right.
UNC and Bama. And so like the fact that like UNC has two shot makers like Davis and Jackson together, it's like, man, most college teams don't have that kind of, that they have most college teams don't have one of those guys. So for UNC to have two plus some of the other talent, I know that the roster feels like a little incomplete at the five position, but like, man, there's just so much scoring punch in the backcourt and ball screen operation talent that I think UNC is going to be like just fine this season. And yeah, Jackson might be a multi-year guy, but I really like the shooting talent. I'd like to see him just get to initiate and play make a little bit more with the ball because
Um,
there's big time scoring upside and he can leverage that and play off of it too. But yeah, I like Ian Jackson and Drake Powell a lot. I think both those guys are really intriguing prospects at UNC.
I'm just telling you, man. He's the one. So, like, I believe and pay attention more to intangibles now than I did when I started. I used to be like, blanket assumption is that most guys work really, really hard. Most guys' heads are on straight. So
Mhm.
I'm not going to try to look for negatives and dock someone for quote unquote negative intangibles because I don't know what the hell is going on with them really.
Yeah,
But since I've been doing the work a little bit more, I feel like, learned that there really are outlier positive intangibles, and where just someone is so extreme in their approach, in their confidence, in their comfort in some of these crazy environments. And I just think he has that. And I think, for the record, that McCain was that guy last year,
for
apart
sure.
from his shooting talent. But like the intangibles with McCain, that, like, you can talk about his TikTok and whatever, but
Yeah,
just sort of
who cares? He's a
his
badass.
confidence on
Yeah,
like on the NBA stage. There's a reason why everything started clicking for him immediately. It's because he really, really, truly believed that he belonged. And
yep.
that is like coach speak or pundit speak or whatever, but that doesn't mean that it's wrong.
Mhm.
And that's kind of what I think Jackson has got. And with that kind of stuff, that can really boost a prospect. If someone thinks in their mind, quote unquote, this guy is ready for the NBA, even though readiness probably has much more to do with your talent level and where you are talent wise. But like, if they think that they can carry themselves on an NBA floor, carry themselves in an NBA locker room, that takes someone from like maybe you're in the 40s to now some team at 20 likes you. Like, I feel like there is something there with Jackson where the numbers are going to still have to pop. And this heater, I mean, he's 43% from three or whatever he is right now. But I have my eye on it as something that might actually stick and last. And that sort of intangible stuff might take him over the top and
You
get
you
him
got
drafted this year. It's
you got
possible.
to you got to start his first game. They played Campbell today. UNC. I mean, they beat him by a lot. Seth Trimble had, I think, an upper body injury, so Jackson got the start today, and I mean, 26 points, hit a bunch of threes.
Oh,
So like
I missed that.
I mean, he's keeping it. He's keeping. I know it's Campbell. They're like, I mean, it's a solid, Big South program. But he's doing it against everyone. Like he's hitting shots, no matter whom the opponent is. So yeah, he is a guy like I think both he and Powell like they're there's stuff to like with them as prospects now, but there's like a lot of room for them to like really like jump, I think,
Yeah.
between now and then. And yeah, your assessment about McCain, like I gotta spend a lot of time around Jared when he was at Duke last season, and like he had confidence was great, loved the big moments, loved playing in front of the home crowd, the away crowd, just like, and guys loved playing with him because like he was like a positive person to be around. So I'm not surprised that like he's won over Philadelphia fans and has won over even the most like curmudgeon-y of teammates like Kyle Lowry, guys who should be jaded about basketball in the NBA. And then Jared McCain comes rolling into the locker room, he's all smiles and good vibes, and like you, you have to be able to play to like back that up. But if you can play and you bring that stuff, then yeah, it does matter. Um, and yeah, look, the intangible stuff, like it's further down the list than like the physical tools and the impact and the performance metrics and the upside and the archetype, like all of that sort of stuff. But like takes probably supersedes it. But like it does matter. It does. It just does.
Yeah.
Like, it has some value, and Jackson's been fearless so far for them this year. And yeah, like he's just going to have to play more. And it does to me sort of feel like there's opportunities for him there. And yeah, it's gonna mean again, guys like Trimble and Cadeau will play less and
Yeah.
Jackson will play more. And like honestly, like the power of the gravity, the scoring, shooting gravity of someone like Jackson will help out someone like Drake Powell too. Who played pretty well against Campbell today as well too. So you can see like UNC sort of, I don't know. I just think they're molding into a version of them that's going to end up being like a wins machine in the ACC this season. And Jackson again has the ability to, he keeps hitting shots like this, he's gonna keep making a name for himself as like a you know what mid to late first round prospect potentially, something like
Look,
that.
man. Hey, you said it, not me. I didn't
Yeah,
tell. No,
yeah.
I don't know. It depends. If he continues to be one of the if he wants to score 17 a night, then yeah, like that's seven guys who are really good scorers on good college teams as freshmen. Uh, if they have any sort of defensive viability, meaning like can Ian Jackson get skinny and stay over screens and pursue, which he will probably be able to do, then yeah, you can find yourself in the first round very quickly. So, um, okay, Stojakovic. I'm going to get through Stojakovic really quickly because I actually think he has a pretty good chance of entering the draft and staying in the draft, if
Yeah,
for no other reason, and this is somewhat callous, like he doesn't really need the money.
yeah.
So, like, if he wants to go to the NBA and that's what he decides he wants his career to, like, the path he wants his career to take, then he'll go. And his pitch is pretty simple. He is a very, very good shooter. I don't think like quite an elite one, but really quick trigger at about 6'6", 6'7". And he has some surprising kind of feistiness to his game.
Mhm.
Loves to get downhill, loves to challenge bigs at the rim with sort of middling results, but not afraid of contact, pretty tough. And on defense has decent timing and recovery on blocks. He has like a 4 block rate, which again is wild when you watch him. You talked about Zack Austin getting the things you don't expect him to. Stojakovic gets to stuff I really don't expect him to
Mhm.
get to.
Yeah,
Um, but that's sort of he is sort of a straight lines kind of guy. Passing vision is not very good. Cal is not a very good team, in part because I think they revolve around him and he is not an offensive force unto himself. But he is a player with defined NBA traits, and he is a enough of a wing-sized person that I think that he could get a boost maybe into that second round and hear his name called. I don't know if there's anything you want to add on Stojakovic, but like a fun little shoot and drive game that
yeah,
he's got.
yeah. I think you said it at 6'7", 200 pounds, 210 pounds. However, quite how big he is, but his ability to, I mean, he really does get downhill. Like he's a pretty forceful driver.
Yeah,
He can play through the bump. Um, and again, like he's not this like amazing, finisher at the rim, but he can he
that's what's
can get
awesome. Is
there.
that he's not a great finisher, but he's going, man.
But and I mean he had some, and when they played Stanford the a couple of weeks ago, isn't it some finishes over Raynaud,
Yep.
at bucket. We sort of talked about like he was one of the guys that I thought looked pretty like unafraid of Raynaud's contests at the rim. Raynaud did block him on one baseline drive though too. But yeah, I just the offensive skill set, 6'7" wing who you can feature in actions in a bunch of different ways, can shoot off movement, uh, can drive, get downhill, can create, is always looking to get into the paint. I mean, yeah, he is on the list of guys like for like most improved in the conference, right? With
Hmm.
Triple and Blakes. And Stojakovic has been, he's been a beast so far this season. So yeah, he's not like he alone is not enough to just like fully prop up an offense like on the college ranks, certainly. But I would say the size, the shooting upside with that drive game is enough to it pluses. I mean, his name being Stojakovic probably doesn't. I mean, people hear
Of
that.
course.
I mean, you and I are not alone in terms of like where your head drifts to. You just think of tall shooter, and his dad was obviously incredible. I don't think of him like he's not. Most people are not the caliber of shooter that his father was, but he can shoot. And I don't know. He's a guy to I think to like keep an eye on. I'm kind of curious to see sort of like how his usage gets routed throughout the season. Um, but again, the like ability to like get into the paint has been like super encouraging so far.
Yeah. I think that he will probably go. I would be surprised if he maintains his current level of production as like their leading scorer. I don't think he has any interest in being Cal's leading scorer next year or someone else's leading scorer next year. I think he's going
Yeah.
to want to go. But uh, this brings us to the last guy I really wanted to discuss, unless you feel like we've missed anyone, but that's Jacob Cofie at Virginia.
Hmm.
Uh, I think that it is, as everything stands right now, unlikely that Cofie is going to want to go next year unless he like crushes the combine or something, if he gets invited to the combine even. But he is a freshman, uh, big, I think fine to call him a big
Yeah.
for Virginia, who is averaging 8 points, 6 rebounds, and basically slightly positive assist to turnover ratio, but he's about like 6'9", 230 or something. Like clearly a big, strong kid. And his, I guess, main selling point is the combination of his sort of overall motor for both
Mhm.
sides of the ball, particularly defense, with what appears to be legitimate shooting touch. Not nothing crazy because he's only 7 of 25 from 3, but he's 12 of 14 from the line, and his shot when he shoots it is sort of like a catch and shoot form, kind of like a trebuchet-ish kind of form, but it looks pretty good to me. Looks okay. What has surprised me about Kofi is that, look, this is Virginia. Virginia's undergoing, this is sort of almost a lost season before it even got started with Tony Bennett's sudden resignation. But he, it's hard because after watching them for so many years, I just have ingrained in my mind that like their offense is not going to really amplify the sort of in between skills or the latent offensive skills of some big wing. That is unlikely to happen there. And you like, maybe there's too much of Ryan Dunn all of a sudden being an NBA player who is, making threes and everything. But I just get the sense that there might be more to Kofi than meets the eye here. And like he's very active and light on his feet. He will screen and dive and he will make short roll passes. And he like it seems like he wants to be more involved in this offense, but Virginia hasn't quite leaned into it yet. And I wanted to know your thoughts about that and what kind of an offensive player you think we might have here. I think defensively, with again his nimbleness and his size, you can convince yourself that this guy could play in the NBA one day, but offensively is where I'm really looking at for him. So what do you think about him overall, and what sort of development do you think we might see this season as that offense kind of finds itself?
Yeah, the first off, love the defense in his frame. Like that is it's awesome. It really, and I think he's got good feel, good anticipation.
Yes.
Like is making like next level rotations and closeouts, and is just like popping up in the right place and doing like destructive stuff when he shows up. I mean,
And is a freshman, if I haven't mentioned it. He is a
freshman, yeah,
freshman.
freshman from Seattle, Washington, has like
Yeah.
a good frame and a frame that's like, you can add to, right? From like a strength standpoint. Um,
Yeah. And he's
yeah,
a big guy. Yeah.
yeah. And he moves really well. He's fast. You can see him like get out and when they're able to get out and transition. I mean, he is like, man, this Virginia team is so weird for so many different reasons. But he is so much like he's just like a classic like Tony Bennett, recruit, like a guy that Bennett would have uh not gotten out of nowhere because he wasn't like a nothing recruit, you know what I mean? But like wasn't like a 5-star guy that
Yeah,
was
I
gonna
think he
come
was
in.
91st was what he was ranked.
Yeah, it's
And
just perfect. Like this is the Dunn, the DeAndre Hunter, like these types of like wings that come into the system. The UVA was an excellent player development program underneath Bennett. Um, it was going to come there, surprise you early on, and then just get better and better, sort of like as the years went along. The shooting's been really touch and go this season for him, and he's really struggled shooting the ball against their best competition.
he struggled with foul trouble against his
Yeah.
best competition. Like,
So
yeah,
like that's the thing that has me like tapping the brakes a lot right now. I mean, like a month ago, it was
right.
it was pretty eye opening. It was like, wow, this guy like he looks ready now. And again, you gotta like again hit the brakes a little bit. But I like the passing. I like the vision. Again, there's a lot of stuff he does on both sides that speak to me as like a high field player, a good
Hmm.
participation, and at that size, and that length, and his ability to impact defensively. It's like if the shot comes along, like yeah, I think this is a guy that's like has the ability to be in NBA rotations for a long time because he can do a lot of stuff for you defensively. He's impactful. He's versatile. He can keep the ball moving. This is the also like in part because like it, there's no way from the outside looking in, there's no way for me to know for sure like how much the departure of Bennett just before the season like is causing some of the confused offensive identity for Virginia, or like they're implementing like a lot of new stuff this year, and how much of that is sort of like Ron Sanchez, the interim head coach? How much is that him and the staff trying to just like ram stuff in now versus like Tony Bennett seeing his offense like really crumble once again last season and thinking like, hey, I need to uh in the offseason, like how much were they sort of like working on and developing these types of things? You know what I mean? This is not because this is not UVA coming down and running blocker mover for 95% of its possessions. Like they're different on that side of the court now. Um, but Reese Beekman left. He's in the NBA now. And they've been trying to figure out like the point guard position. Day Ames has been huge for them. They need him as like a driver. Isaac McNeely is a guy that probably has at least some NBA potential because of his just incredible off-ball shooting ability and the fact that he's got some decent size and he can play with the ball a little bit too. But like that, they're really starved on that side of the court. So they're a team that I don't think is really providing like the optimal like offensive ecosystem for a guy like Jacob Cofie.
But
Uh,
that's why, sorry to interrupt, but
yeah,
that's
no,
why
go
I
for it.
want, if he has size, which he does, and he has finishing ability, which it seems like he does, and he has this ability as a short roll passer, then they should just like try to rely on him a little bit more, give him more of a chance, involve him in more actions, and see what he does when he gets hold of the ball. Like that's what I'm saying. And that's what is frustrating. I know it's early, But like, I think some of his struggles against bigger competition are just like, yeah, this is a big jump in competition and it's still very early in the season and he's
Yeah.
battling like grown men, NIL men on the glass, and he might
Yeah.
get outplayed on the glass from time to time, or he might foul from time to time. But that doesn't, I don't know. I don't think that should make Virginia any less confident in using him and using him hard. Like he's
Mhm.
yet to play. Has he played 25 minutes in a game yet? I guess
Maybe
against
20.
like major competition, he has not quite
Mhm.
gotten there yet. And I want them to push that for him. He closed this game against Memphis that was very close. He was in foul trouble for that game, but he at least started that game and played the last like 6 minutes. I just I want to see them basically shrug their shoulders and be like, well, this guy's probably one of our four best players. We might as well
Yep.
use him accordingly, you know?
Yep. No, agreed. They need to scale him up like they
Yeah.
do. And like, I mean, he's gonna have to not pick up. I mean, he's been kind of a fouls machine for them so far this season. So like, he's got to be, if his role's going to increase, like he's got to sort of like do the simple stuff to stay on the court a little bit more. But
Sure.
yeah, like he's clearly the most talented player on this team. And I know it's like a guy like McNeely is probably like more important just because of his like shooting and offensive talent. But a guy like for a team like Virginia that is going to be like fighting for survival in the ACC this season, and is sort of like lacking playmaking talent offensively, like you've got to find a way. Like the more this guy has to be involved more. And he started the last two games for them, including that Memphis game, and he started for them in the last game before the break against American. But they just need they kind of have to like max out with him this season. And that's going to mean a lot of opportunities for this guy to sort of like show his skills. I'm not sure if he's a 25 guy, like a 2025 guy,
Right.
but they're absolutely, in my opinion, like we've talked a lot about a lot of sort of like fringy guys in this episode. To me, he's on the other side of that. Like this guy really does reek of NBA talent because you bet on size, guys like with that size and movement, right? And
And
like
feel,
and
which he's
those
got.
exactly. And so it's like
Yeah.
I'll ride. Like, he's gonna be one of my guys, until like he's safely on an NBA roster. Until
Yeah.
he's guided to the other side. Like he's a guy that I'll probably vouch for.
But
I'd
like,
like
yeah,
to,
when
I'd
I
like to
when
see him
I
shoot it more, but other than that, I'm feeling pretty good about a lot of the other stuff he's shown so far this year.
Well, and when we talked about Murray Boyles and Schieffelin and how like that kind of a player, there's a couple examples of that in the draft class. I mean, you have the extremely bouncy version in like Austin Newell or Adut Dario in at Arkansas. Like I'll get to all those guys in
Mhm.
time. But like Cofie is in he's not as athletically explosive as all those guys, but in terms of like lateral movement, it's a similar thing. And that's why when you say that Virginia needs to max him out, like he will get NIL money from a more uh what's the word I'm looking for? More heralded program than Virginia next year. Like I think it is unlikely he is at Virginia next year no matter where he goes. So
Yeah, I,
from a
I don't know what I just don't know what it looks like for them, and this is like it's a really weird season for them right now. It really
But
is.
that's why, like, from a program standpoint, I would be like, well, it's probably better for us, the University of Virginia, if Kofi makes the NBA and the only team he's played for is the Virginia Cavaliers,
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah,
but it's hard. They probably got a million things that they're trying to just do to survive every day. But
yeah.
hopefully one of those things that they check off their list is just to get this man the ball as like a post hub or
Mhm.
in the short roll or something, because I think good things will happen.
The
But
I would just one other you were sort of talking about some of those other like hyper athlete like front court guys. I would just
Mhm.
recommend Toby Lawal from
I was
Tech.
wondering if you were going to mention him.
So
Yeah.
he played at VCU, transferred in. Is I mean, in like the non Cooper Flag division, is one of the best athletes in the ACC.
Yeah.
Long arm, can really jump, tons of dunks, blocks already this season.
Watching him play against Austin and Pitt was a fun watch.
Was fun.
Yeah.
I watched that game. I finished it earlier today. So
Yeah.
and he was quite good at that game, and he's shown some shooting touch too. So he's another sort of like dark horse guy from the conference that's gotten better year over year since he started off 2 seasons ago at VCU. But just special athlete for at least for the ACC this season.
Yeah. Another guy like I will, you know, Virginia Tech is also not projected to be very good. I'd like to see maybe they give him a chance to run an inverted pick and roll. That'd be nice.
Mhm.
It's not the most fashionable thing to do in college basketball, but I'd like to see it just to see what he does when he has to make a decision besides, end
Pick and run.
everyone,
Yeah. Yeah.
but yeah, indeed, fun player for sure.
Mhm.
All right. Anything else that you want to hit before I let you go? We can't.
We
It
got
is very late where we both live, even though we're in
yes.
different time zones. So I
Yes.
don't want to take up any more of your time.
Yeah, no, I think we touched on a lot. I mean, at some other point we can maybe get to some of the, whatever's going on. Miami has a couple of guys like with Bethea, Cleveland, pack that are maybe worth touching on at some point. Syracuse has some, if you're still in on guys like JJ Starling or Chris Bell as potential guys. But I think for the most part we covered some good ground, and again touching on the UNC guys was big in my mind. I'm glad we got to touch on Jacob Cofie as well too.
Awesome. Well, Brian, thank you so much. Again, split the action, briangeisinger.substack.com. What is your Blue Sky handle?
Blue Sky is at B Geisinger dot bsky dot social, and I'm posting a fair amount there.
Yeah.
There's like it feels like draft and like college hoops coverage is like behind sort of like NBA and some other stuff there, in terms of
It's
networks.
okay.
And
It'll get
it's
there.
getting better. But yeah, I'm there, and if I'm still on the old Twitter at bguys_bird. So lots of those are the best place where you'll find me, tweeting out links and
Yeah,
uh,
and
videos and all that kind of jazz.
Just for reference, I'm chuckingdartsnba.bsky.social. I'm still on Twitter as well. But if you want to see anything that I clip, any plays that I clip, that I want to make a point about a specific player, all that stuff is on Blue Sky.
Yeah.
So if anyone's listening and is wondering what is the difference between the two platforms in terms of content, any video that I post is going to be on Blue Sky. So
Yep.
thank you guys very much for listening. This has been Chucking Darts. It is okay to be wrong about sports. Find your dartboard and start chucking. Thank you.